Hello and welcome to today's My Solo 401k Financial YouTube webinar. We're going to be getting started momentarily. We're just waiting for the viewers to join. I see that we've got some viewers that are joining. Thank you so much for joining. We're just waiting for more viewers to join and check in the audio, and then we'll be getting started here shortly. Thank you so much for participating and joining. So let's see. It appears that the audio is working, and we're going to go ahead and get started. Again, thank you for taking the time to join. This is another My Solo 401k Financial weekly YouTube webinar. Today's topic is we're going over the differences and similarities between a ROBS 401k business financing versus a self-directed IRA LLC. Which can I use to fund my business? So I would ask you to please like this video and please subscribe. If you have questions as we're going through the slides, please chat them over through the YouTube chat function, and I'll answer those questions as we go through the slides. We'll also be posting this on our My Community and hosting a discussion thread on our My Community on this topic. You'll be able to access these slides. You'll be able to access you'll be able to also access the full recording. You can join the discussion. Again, we'll have a discussion thread. We've also got a host of other, a whole number of other topics out there. We do webinars almost every day of the week. I'll chat over a link if you'd like to join. So it's free and all are welcome. So let's get started with the session. We're going to be going through the following topics, which is the purpose of a ROBS 401k versus the purpose of a self-directed IRA LLC, the eligibility rules, how the different plans are structured. We'll talk about loans, and then how to get more information, etc. So as far as the purpose, to talk about it in simple terms, a ROBS 401k, also known as a rollover as business startup, is for people that want to use retirement money to start or buy a business or even expand an existing business and use retirement money without paying taxes or penalties. Now, there's specific requirements, there's eligibility rules, etc., and we'll touch on that in a moment. But that's the core purpose, is it's for business financing. So that's why we call it our 401k business financing plan. With the IRA LLC, this is for people that want to invest their retirement money in alternative investments. So not your business, but things such as real estate, precious metals, cryptocurrency. So not your traditional Wall Street oriented investments like a stock or a mutual fund. Here we're talking about investing in alternative investments. And then above and beyond that, the ability to do so with checkbook control, where you have direct checkbook control over your money, so you can act quickly to make an investment. So as opposed to a self-directed IRA, where you might be able to invest in alternative investments, but you're not going to have checkbook control because the custodian holds the money. So again, as we're going through these slides, please don't hesitate to ask questions. You can ask questions on the community if you're watching as a recording, in the discussion thread, etc. So thank you so much again for everyone's participation. So now let's talk about eligibility. So in order to be eligible to process or do a ROBS 401k transaction, you have to have eligible retirement money that you can roll over, and you've got to be ready to satisfy the ongoing requirements. So let's touch on those for a moment. So in terms of the money that's eligible to be rolled over, that's money that's in a former employer plan or a non-Roth IRA. In terms of those ongoing requirements, you need to work in the business. You need to be a bona fide employee, and it needs to be a business. So it needs to be an operating company is a technical term. So for example, that's a business that's providing goods or services, right? It could be a restaurant or a clothing store, or it could even be a real estate operating company requirement where you have a business that's managing or developing real estate. It owns real estate and it manages and or develops it. And so this type of business could also have W-2 employees. If you have to be an employee, so when you receive compensation, you would have to receive compensation as a W-2 employee. And then on top of that, the company could have other employees, right? It could be that restaurant business where you have a bunch of employees. Now contrast that with the IRA LLC eligibility. So anyone can set up an IRA LLC, right? You just for an individual, right? You don't have to operate a business, doesn't have to be a C corporation, et cetera, like you would with a ROBS 401k business financing plan. And in terms of funding that IRA LLC, you can fund it by making contributions. You can fund it by transferring money from a former employer plan or even a traditional IRA or Roth IRA. So with the ROBS 401k, the structure requires a qualified plan, and you can't roll money over from a Roth IRA to a qualified plan like a 401k. Whereas with the self-directed IRA LLC, you could set up a Roth IRA LLC where you can self-direct with checkbook control into alternative investments, money that's in your Roth IRA. Now let's talk about the structure. So as I mentioned, the 401k business financing plan is going to allow you to use retirement money without having to pay taxes or penalties to start or buy a business or even expand an existing business. But you have to follow specific requirements. For example, you have to operate the business as a C corporation. And so that's going to entail then that C corporation is going to sponsor a 401k plan. So you end up with two accounts. You have a bank account for the corporation at the bank of your choice, and then there's an account for the 401k. So the money rolls over from the former employer plan or your non-Roth IRA to the 401k. The plan allows you, like with our ROBS 401k plan, we have an IRS approved plan that allows you to invest in your own business. So then the money goes from that IRA or from that 401k into the business account. So it goes, say, traditional IRA, 401k account, business account. Then going forward with the structure, you're operating the business through that C corporation. And then once the business is generating income to justify your compensation, you may receive reasonable compensation. And that has to be paid to you as W-2 wages, because the whole foundation of the transaction is that you're rolling your money over to a 401k. In order for you to be able to participate in that 401k, you need to be a bona fide employee of that employer, right? 401ks are for that employer's employees. And thank you so much for the questions. We'll get through a slide or two before we turn to the questions. A slide or two more. So in terms of the IRA LLC structure, you first have to have an IRA that's going to allow you to invest in a brand new LLC. So that's not going to be an IRA at typical brokerage like Fidelity or Vanguard. It's got to be at one of these specialty self-directed IRA providers or custodians or trust companies. And of that pool of specialty IRA providers and trust companies and custodians, there are some that will allow you to invest in an LLC. So the LLC is required for the checkbook control, because otherwise, I mean, you could roll over your money to one of these self-directed IRA custodians that allows you to invest in alternative investments, but they hold the money. You're not going to get a checkbook associated with the IRA account. So if you want to be able to invest with checkbook control, you work with one of those custodians that allows you to invest in an LLC. The IRA invests in the LLC, so the money moves into a bank account for that LLC. Then you serve as the manager of the LLC. The member is your IRA. So you do have the two accounts like you do with the ROBS, but in this scenario, one account is for the IRA, the second account is for the LLC. Once the money's in that LLC, then you can start investing in alternative investments. Now, this has to be a passive investment. So unlike with the ROBS, where you have to be an employee, you got to be working in the business. With the IRA LLC investment, you can't work. So if it's real estate, you can't work on the property. You can't use it for personal use. You definitely cannot receive any type of compensation or commission. So you're really just investing your retirement money, but instead of investing it in, say, a mutual fund, you're investing it in this other alternative investment, presumably because you think it's going to grow faster, or you're going to get a diversification benefit, right? Or maybe both. So let's field some of these questions. So can you have a ROBS under a sole proprietorship? So the answer is no. You have to follow specific structural requirements, one of them being that you operate the business via a C corporation. So you definitely can't use a sole proprietorship. Now you could fund an existing sole proprietorship, you'd have to convert your business to a C corporation, among other considerations that you'd want to think through. No. So here the question is, can you set up an LLC under the ROBS 401k with your spouse or children as long as the C Corp is the majority owner? So I understand the structure that you're proposing here is that you would have a C corporation that sponsors a 401k, you invest in the stock of the C corporation, and now you want to have an LLC underneath that C corporation where it's not a 100% subsidiary of the C corporation, but instead there are other owners of that LLC, including your spouse or children, which are both disqualified persons. So the C corp, we do have, we do see structures where you have a ROBS funded C corporation that has a LLC underneath it for different reasons, right? You might have different lines of business. You might want to hold real estate in a separate entity. Typically, the LLC subsidiary is 100% sub. And of course, it can't be taxed as an S corporation because an S corporation can't be owned by a C corporation. It is possible to have other owners of that LLC, but in that situation where it's not 100% sub, the C corporation would definitely need to be the majority owner, and the other owners would have to be unrelated persons that invested cash in proportion to their ownership percentage. So here that doesn't qualify because you got related persons in this proposal. Thank you so much for the good question, though. We definitely appreciate it. So good. Now we got another follow-up question here. Speaking of compensation, can you wait until the profits are generated to pay yourself, or do you recommend take some form of compensation from the beginning? Actually, we recommend that or the way that you want to do this is that you can't take compensation, salary, W-2 wages until the business is generating income, not necessarily profit, to justify your compensation, your reasonable compensation. So in other words, just to parse that out and approach it from a couple of different angles, right? You can't roll over money via ROBS 401k to fund your salary. You need to wait until the corporation is generating income to justify your salary. And that doesn't have to necessarily be profit, right? But you need to have money coming in. The business needs to be up and running. And then it's going to be limited to reasonable compensation. So what does that mean? So that means what the company would have to pay somebody else to do all the things that you are doing in the business. So let's move forward with the slides. So additional financing. So we covered that slide. Now we're going to talk about additional financing. So with the ROBS 401k business financing plan, again, the goal here is business financing. And so But a lot of our clients and prospective clients, they're considering transactions where ROBS, the retirement money, is just part of the financing plan. So they potentially want to use a business loan or an SBA or seller financing, and all of that is fine. The loan, of course, needs to be made in the name of the C corporation, and the individual can personally guarantee it. As a matter of fact, with the SBA, under the SBA guidelines, they recognize that the SBA borrower, meaning the C corporation, might be funded via a ROBS transaction, and then they would typically require any 20% or more owner to guarantee that SBA loan. But of course, a 20% or more owner is going to be the 401k. And under the IRS rules, the 401k cannot guarantee a loan to the sponsor of the plan, to the C corporation. So the SBA rules give in and say, okay, well, in that case, we'll look to you to personally guarantee it. And of course, the banks would almost always want to get your personal guarantee, whether it's SBA or not. Now, in the IRA LLC context, it's also possible to get additional financing. Of course, here we're not talking about a business, right? So it wouldn't be an SBA loan. But, oftentimes it's going to be non-recourse financing. So it comes up in the context typically of real estate, right? So you want to invest your retirement money in real estate. You cannot get a traditional mortgage, right? So you can't personally guarantee a loan to your retirement account in order to invest in a rental property or some other piece of real estate. But there are specialty lenders out there that will lend to retirement accounts. In this case, the LLC that's owned by your IRA. It has to be non-recourse. In other words, the lender's only recourse in the event of default is to go after the property. Like I said, you can't personally guarantee it. Their only recourse is the property. So that means they're going to price it differently, right? They will typically want about 50% down based on feedback from our clients and, and others in the industry. It's going to be a shorter term than you might otherwise be able to get if you were making an investment just in your own name, higher interest rates, etc. And unlike with the ROBS, like I mentioned, you can't personally guarantee it. So you definitely don't want to use, we just want to highlight here, you definitely don't use the IRA LLC for business financing. This was made clear from the guidance, from the tax court findings, etc. So the IRA LLC is not for business financing. It's for investing. So if you're considering passively investing in alternative investments, then the IRA LLC may make sense. If you need financing for a business that will operate under a C corporation structure, then the ROBS 401k may be an option. And obviously we say this in an educational sense. We're not giving you investment advice. There's a lot of other considerations, right, from a business, business, tax, etc. perspective. But just to highlight it in an educational sense in terms of the differences. If you want to get more information, feel free to contact us at business@mysolo401k.net, 1-800-489-7571. Or like I mentioned at the outset, jump onto our community site. We have a lot of people participating in our forums, as well as in our weekly webinars. We can jump on a Zoom call and ask questions, and we can keep the education going. So we really appreciate everyone's participation. We do have more time for questions if there's any more follow-up questions. I don't see any more follow-up questions. So like I said, thank you so much for everyone's participation. So until next time, thank you.